Well, Chris, thanks for coming all the way to sunny Adelaide. I could probably speculate on the answer to this, but I'd like to hear your response. You confirmed that even if this, well, let's say it is going to go ahead and prove your chance, since it's got the word battery in it, it's tempting to say, well, we don't need distributed batteries. But you've said that we do. So why?
Why do we need distributed batteries, or why do we have the name?
No, I'm okay with
We have the name because the PM gave us the name.
Yeah, no,
And no one was brave enough to say PM, it's a silly name,
Yeah,
so we ran with it.
no,
Yeah, no, look, if we go back to the slide, I mean, there's a lot of slides there too, so I sort of admit that, but go back to the slide that talks about all the different storage requirements. So you're going to need storage that operates in the 0 to 2 hour range, all the way through to the multi-day range. And that's because the stuff that's in the 0 to 2 isn't going to be large-scale energy storage. It's not bulk energy storage. It's there to stabilise the system. It's to manage those really short-term perturbations that the pumped hydro won't be able to do. There's another graph that I even show here that shows you the range of those storage requirements and the technologies. And it shows you where they all fit. But to be able to manage the system and make sure that it's reliable and it's secure, so that's short-term and long-term, you're going to need that mix of large long-term storage and the shorter-term stuff as well. Batteries have a lot of advantages. They're easily distributed. You can distribute them throughout the network. You can get them close to loads. They're very quick to put out there. There's a lot of very good reasons why there'll be a lot of batteries in our system in the future.
very good, thank you.
Is that all right?
Yes.
That was a pretty politically safe answer too, I reckon.
Just really a comment, the battery is just storage of energy. Whether you store it in hydro or in lithium or in
But it's not
hydrogen,
Chris has pointed out the difference.
yeah, it's all the same. That's back.
Are the slides of your talk presentation available to us after that?
Yeah, we'll send you a pack. I need to get someone to vet them all to make sure that I haven't put anything in that I shouldn't. But I think looking through the slides, they're all pretty safe. And that video's available on YouTube as well. So if you want to have a look at that.
What about that one about hydro station, Cascade Gorge, Launceston?
Look, I won't talk about that one specifically. The really interesting thing about hydropower, though, is that not all hydropower is equal either. So even in our scheme, we've got 5 different schemes, and they all differ in their controllability.
Yeah, this one was I think, from the plaque on it, was the first.
It was.
In the southern hemisphere.
Yep, it was.
Hydro, yeah.
It did.
And
It fed
all the
Launceston.
All the gaslight people went home weeping.
It was the first hydropower. And it triggered.
Yeah.
It's not running now because the water's been rediverted through Trevelyan, but it triggered the Tasmanian hydropower development story. That's a whole other hour of conversation. But not long after that came Lake Margaret on the west coast, which fed the copper mines. That still is running now. It's got wood stave pipelines.
Wow.
It's heritage listed.
What will your pumped hydro capacity be compared to Snowy in the next 10, 20, 30 years?
Yeah, so if you go out far enough and you look at the overall requirement, it's all going to be needed. So you probably might even end up needing Snowy 3 as well. There's a significant requirement.
Yeah.
So we don't think that's the issue. We don't also think that it's an issue that we're trying to come into the market at the same time as them, because essentially Snowy 2 will first go north,
Yes.
because New South Wales needs it. Victoria won't see a lot of that. So if you get an earlier retirement of coal-fired generators in Victoria, earlier than the 50-year cycle, it's where our market opportunity is Hydro Tasmania is Victoria in the first instance. And South Australia as a secondary consideration because of the linkages between those two states. But that's why we're pretty relaxed about the idea that they need to move as quickly as they can and we need to move as quickly as we can, because you may well find the 2 biggest states in the system are going to need a lot of support over the next 10 or 15 years.
But what's your relative capacities?
Sorry. Snowy 2 is 2,000 megawatts, and it's got a storage of about 170 hours. So it's very, very large.
Yeah.
So much bigger capacity as one station for us, and much larger duration of storage. The flip side to that, though, is that it's one big bang investment. You've got to put out a lot of money,
Before you get returns?
well, on one project. You've got it's the big bang. And you've got transmission upgrades, very significant transmission upgrades that aren't much different to what we're talking about here for a new connection.
And what's the length of construction
For them,
for them?
you'd have to ask them.
Gut feel.
Okay.
10 years?
Sorry. They've talked about coming online around 2024, 2025 as well. But you'd need to look at their latest releases.
The latest release is 8 years.
There you go.
Chris, congratulations on the strategic foresight and leadership which you and that Tasmanian crew are doing. Where else do you see pockets of leadership on this long-term strategy within the country?
Oh look, I'm a bit of an optimist. Like I think the market really is now starting to realise how big this challenge is, and I think that we're slowly, although we've got varying views on coal-fired generation and all the rest of it. I think where we're heading, there's an inevitability of where we're heading because the market's actually, even if you're not a market enthusiast, the market is actually telling us where the future is right now.
Right.
We've just got to work out how to make it happen.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm an engineer by trade, even though I don't do much engineering these days. My job is to work with all the other market players, and that's in the regulatory sense or in the market, to work out how do we come up with the best solutions. And it's going to be a mix of short-term and long-term investments. It's going to be, but we've got collaboration is the key for me. I'll be successful if I can collaborate, not just in Tasmania, but nationally. And I think there is that growing sense in the conversations that we're having behind closed doors with lots of different players. You look at people. I mean, people look at this in Victoria, and we explain this to them, and they go, "That sounds like a pretty good idea." You know, we need to keep talking to you guys.
Yeah.
Probably more of a question for the economists at hydro, but as far as driving prices down, hydro schemes that you're talking about, is that as an effective a thing as what other renewables will be, you know, that don't have fuel costs?
Well, the easiest answer to start that off is that this isn't in competition with wind and solar. You need this sort of investment to make wind and solar reliable. So they're not in competition. You need them both. And I think the AEMO graph here shows you quite clearly that you need new generation and new storage because of the nature of the new generation. Our view is from a cost competitive sense, we've got we've got an existing system that you can repurpose. It's already built. You don't need to build it. So that's capital investment wise, that's a pretty good proposition. And that has a big influence on the Marinus assessment. And the pumped hydro assessments, because of the nature of our topography and the head start we've got, they're very, very cost competitive as well. I think you're only going to find one other site that's under development across Australia at the moment that's anywhere near the numbers we're talking about at 1.5, and that's the Shoalhaven pumped hydro development that
Origin.
No, Origin are doing in New South Wales. That's about a 250 megawatts, roughly speaking, a 250 megawatt proposal. So from a cost competitive perspective, we think that these sites are pretty good sites.
You're going into wind, that was an adjunct to the hydro, or was that to...
No, we're not necessarily we're not saying we're going to be building all that wind. We believe the market will build that wind. Strategically, we feel that it's actually better off that we stick to our knitting in this next phase and focus on the pumped hydro development that will come along. Doing that pumped hydro development as well as a development of Tarraleah is a massive task in itself. The market already wants to build the wind. There's significant big players in Tasmania at the moment that really want to build a lot of wind. And it'll create a far more diverse market in Tasmania. And then when you put more interconnection into Victoria, it actually links those two together, and you get a far more diverse market in Victoria and Tasmania as a result. And we think that's a good thing for the market.
In relation to the wind, can I ask a question? If you think about if you've got wind, you can't actually store that immediately apart from with pumped hydro. If your dams are full and you've got rain falling, you've really got the best way is to use that in terms of electricity. What proportion with the sort of planned wind farms and the capacity that you've got to use will actually fulfill Tasmania's requirements?
Yeah, okay. I'll try and answer that reasonably quickly. We're really when you put more interconnection in, it's not just about a Tasmanian market. It then becomes about the Victorian market. You're basically removing a constraint between two regions. You'll almost end up with one region. Don't call me on that one, but you could end up with one region because there's no constraints between the two of them. And that may be the result when you put interconnection across the whole market. Who knows? So in terms of balancing the energy supply, it becomes a very, very different question. It's not just about how we do it in Tasmania. It's how we do it in Tasmania in conjunction with Victoria in terms of their needs and also the needs in Tasmania. So we're more than comfortable that we can actually repurpose our system to actually bring those new technologies online. We've got lots of excess. We've got lots of storage that we don't use at the moment because economically there's no point keeping our dams full. So
That's
yeah,
right.
we run them.
This
We
is
run them
why I'm
between
asking
30
the
and 50.
question.
Well, at the moment we run them roughly between 30 and 50%
Yeah.
seasonally. So this time of the year it's about 30. At the end of spring it's about 50. Because economically, there's no point we don't have an economic driver to keep more than that in storage, and that's more than enough storage to make sure that the lights stay on in Tasmania. So if you have an incentive for storage, well then we would have an incentive potentially to hold them higher.
Yeah.
So there's lots of flexibility in how you can utilise the system.
Just last question there.
I was going to suggest that, in fact, using DC interconnectors makes the grid inherently more stable on both the Victorian and the Tasmanian side because you don't have that synchronisation concern, which we've got across the entire NEM from Townsville down to bloody Port Lincoln, because it's mostly AC interconnected, and therefore you've got that synchronisation problem across the entire grid. Whereas you've got your DC gap, means you've got isolated synchronisation in Tasmania as opposed to whatever the synchronisation is on the main NEM.
And the new voltage source converter technology allows you a lot of flexibility in it. You can actually make the interconnector look like a generator in Tasmania or Victoria. It's quite amazing what they can do with this sort of technology now.
Is that similar to the Tesla battery? How that's saved a lot of short-term dropouts in milliseconds?
It could, but as I said, I'm not an
Yeah,
interconnector
okay.
expert. You can get guys over here that will talk interconnection till the cows come home. They love it. But yeah, there's a lot of opportunities with having more DC interconnection between the
Much
two
more
states.
stable grid.
Okay, I think we better stop there. I'm sure Chris will be available.